Welcome back. This is Sunday edition. Now, for the last couple of weeks or so, the Sunday Standard, has been, and KTN News as well, have been telling the story of the standard gauge railway, what has been happening. There have been claims of discrimination against Kenyan workers. There has been a lot of allegations pointed towards the Chinese nationals who have been working to maintain and run the standard gauge railway. More of that still on the Sunday Standard this morning on pages 4 and 5. What has been revealed, Kenyans shouldering the burden of around 5,000 Chinese workers running the standard gauge railway. Some of the things that have come out of that investigations, the Chinese are exempted from the 400,000 Kenyan shillings work permit fee required for expatriates, in the process denying government revenue amounting to 2 billion Kenyan shillings. The president, among this massive workforce, are civil and structural engineers, accountants, dietitians, cooks, self-taught locomotive operators, all that. A lot of this is in that story. So what we are saying, we're looking at this, is Kenya leaning too far east? That is what we are asking, and we're basing this on more than just what's happening at the standard gauge railway. We are taking a look at Kenya's national debt and the Chinese lending to us a lot in the last 6 years or so. Before the Jubilee administration came into power, the Chinese debt to Kenya was less than 100 billion Kenya shillings. We understand from our sources it has risen around 7 times, standing now at around 722 billion Kenya shillings. China controlling the largest amount of Kenya's bilateral debts, and that is set to rise because of SGR phase 2. So that is what has been happening. There have been a lot of people saying that Kenya should be careful when it is in its China or leaning east policy, if you may. People have compared what's happening to Kenya to what's happening in Sri Lanka, where the Chinese debt is too large. They had to hand over one of their ports to China. Is that what's going to happen? What do you think? Join this conversation on social media on hashtag KTN Sunday Edition. Now, let's bring in the Senator from Makueni, Mutula Kilonzo Jr., who was speaking about this to his fellow senators. Let's listen in.
Work permits for foreigners are supposed to be given for work which no Kenyan can do. When a fellow Chinese who cannot speak English is manning a gate and Kenyans are looking for jobs, what are you talking about, you fellows? Let's get to the bottom of this matter quickly. Lastly, can we afford 1 million shillings a day? What are you saying? These people are like, this thing is going to become like the port of Sierra Leone and Sri Lanka. We are going to sell our national treasure to these people. 66% of our debt, and is growing, is to the Chinese. If you don't wake up and smell the coffee, senators, and Kasakaja, I thank you for bringing this up. This is going to be something. They have given me problems. Senator was telling me about Imali Primary School. They split a school into 2. The railway line is in the middle. The school is destroyed. They've refused to repair it. When they go to Makueni, when we complain, they go and bribe the teachers, give them 200,000, 300,000. We have a crisis. Sultan Ahmud had a flood recently. Why? Because of the standard gauge railway. That's the first time we had a flood there. They've blocked all culverts because of raising the railway. Let's get to the bottom of this matter, or history is going to judge us so harshly when we begin paying and selling our country to the Chinese.
So 66% of Kenya's bilateral debt being controlled by China. The senator from Makueni raising some pertinent issues there. Let me start with you, Dismas. What do you think about what he's saying? Is he overreacting?
He's not overreacting. In fact, his statements are an understatement. He's not overreacting. And I've got the latest figures from China that as of March, the bilateral debt was 741 billion. And from China was 534 billion. So essentially, we're talking about 72% of our bilateral debt is from China. And when the Chinese are giving you these kind of commercial loans or commercial debt, number one, they don't take care about human rights. They don't take interest in governance. They just give you loans. They give you loans in a truckload. Unlike if you're getting these kind of loans from other lenders, say the Bretton Woods institutions or maybe from Europe. And this is a disaster. As the senator has indicated, these Chinese, when they get fed up with you, they come and take your assets, as the case is now in Sri Lanka. And Djibouti is on that path. Very soon, the Chinese are going to take over the Djibouti port and start running it. So in Kenya, if you're not very careful, they'll come and take over the port in Mombasa, and then they'll come and take over Jomo Kenyatta International Airport here in Nairobi. And this is a disaster. And one wonders whether top public servants actually participated in the decision-making process. And this will take you back to history. If you had a gentleman like Tom Mboya, who is celebrated as a solid minister for planning.
Right.
If you had somebody like Professor Anyang' Nyong'o, celebrated as a solid minister for planning. If you had a gentleman, Mwai Kibaki, celebrated as a minister for finance, and Musalia Mudavadi, celebrated as a minister for finance, what would they do? Would they allow this kind of project to take place? No. If you go back to the SGR, it's a disaster. It's a white elephant. It's a scandal. And there are not sufficient English words to describe it.
Yet you use President Uhuru Kenyatta's pet project.
Yeah. You use 1 billion for operations and maintenance in a month, then 1.4 billion in interest payments, and you only make $1 billion per annum. That is voodoo economics. That's negative economics. And then when you have the ministers responsible or cabinet secretaries responsible at the National Assembly, people take partisan positions. People say that you are a Jubilee member, you're not supposed to be questioning these projects. You are ODM or Ford Kenya, you've already participated in a handshake, don't ask questions. Maybe what we need today is a commission of inquiry set up by President Kenyatta, in as much as this is space projects, to do investigations. Number one, who did the feasibility study? Number two, who received these contracts? Number three, was there an environmental impact assessment done? Now, basic information reveals that it is the same Chinese. They did a feasibility study, they awarded themselves contracts, they're doing the financing. I don't know whether they did an environmental impact assessment. This kind of incest cannot be allowed to take place.
All right.
I mean, if you go to Hurlingham today, you may think that you're in China because everything is in Chinese. And it's a tragedy that you can actually allow the Chinese in Kenya to import food from China to come and prepare in Kenya, to come with cooks from China, to come with shoe cobblers from China. And according to the story in the Standard, you've got 5,000 Chinese working in Kenya.
Yes.
And the law is very clear that you can only get that kind of resource if there is no Kenyan. So are we telling ourselves that there's no Kenyan who can cook Chinese food?
All right, let me introduce our new panelists here on the show, Lucy Shilo, a political analyst, and the chair of the Kenya Young Politicians Association. Thank you for joining us, madam. Karibu sana.
Thank you so much.
A lot of issues are being raised here. What issues stand out for you in this Chinese, the SGR and the Chinese debt?
First of all, I'm really shocked to see that 5,000 Chinese are the one who are working, while we have our youths in their job race. Yeah? Then on top of that, it's about the debt that we have. So far, we have allowed 5 trillion that's lying, and that's roughly 60% of the GDP. So to me, we are heading to Sri Lanka way if government is not ready to tackle this issue as soon as possible. So as what Didimas has said, I also would like to request the government, that is now Uhuru Kenyatta, to form a committee of inquiry to handle this issue, because where we are heading to, I know in the next...
But when you talk to the Jubilee leadership, they seem to say that all is well with the SGR especially, and that Kenya is headed in the right direction. By the time we start paying the loans, we're going to be okay.
I don't think that we are going to be okay, since now you see what we are getting annually, it's 1 billion, yeah? And we are supposed to pay 1.4 billion. That is now the loan for SDL. So according to you, if you can do your calculation feel well, you can see that things are not working well. And that's why you see Kenyans, what we are doing currently, we are not paying the interest rate, yeah? Because we cannot pay the loan itself.
All right.
Yeah, so it's a very serious issue.
Mark, the Deputy President did respond to a question on the SGR, saying SGR is your matatu. Given the numbers and the figures that have been, published all over, and 66% bilateral debt being controlled by China. Would you say all is well?
There are three things that we need to consider. First, we need to consider what is the Chinese plan. The Chinese are building a new Silk Road. Okay, this Silk Road is both in terms of road, it's rail, and it's ports across Africa, Europe, and Asia. Why are they doing this? Because they want to be the center of commerce. That is their idea. And this idea has to be understood with the mind of a Shylock. If you go to a Shylock and he determines you do not have money to pay him back, and he tells you, give me your title deed, I will give you 5,000 shillings, and your title deed is worth 500,000, he is very sure that you will default and he will get the land. Therefore, the Chinese mentality in loaning countries that can hardly afford to pay them back the money to build this infrastructure is they are willing to lose the money to gain the infrastructure. That is the Chinese mindset. The mindset of African countries, and I hope Kenya is an exception, though the signs tell me they are not, is that any money is good money from whoever. And therefore, what we have done is, in the need to expedite our infrastructure and expedite the process of our development, we've taken on more than we can chew. The third mindset is now specific to the SGR. Is it a viable project? There are two ways to look at infrastructure. You can look at infrastructure that pays for itself in terms of the other parts of the economy. Public transport in much of the world is subsidized by the government. So what the government of Kenya is doing is not exceptional. The question we have to ask is there enough business generated and jobs generated out of the SGR to justify its existence? And that might not be justifiable now. It may be justifiable in 10, 13 years, but we have to prove that the year-on-year growth of the transportation of goods and not necessarily people is going to increase to a level where it makes sense. However, let us not forget that the trains we got are diesel-powered trains. This is nothing special. So we are balancing on the knife edge. And what is needed is careful economic planning and management of SGR, because it will either be our train to success or it will be a train wreck. But when it comes to how we are handling Chinese nationals, to hiring 1,200 engineers per sector from China, my dear brothers and sisters watching me, we have enough engineers in this country, and many of them sit jobless. Many of them have left their careers because of situations like this. What the government needs to do with speed is give priority to Africans. In fact, at the very least, I would expect that if there are 500 Chinese engineers, there is 600 Kenyan engineers on the basis of maybe they're learning from them.
And speaking of which, the government spokesperson, Eric Kiraithe, did speak about this. He did say, Kipchumba, that Kenyans, the local workers at the SGR still have a lot to learn, and told them to either agree with what's happening or quit and look for other jobs. What is the attitude of the states in this?
That statement from Kiraithe was unfortunate, and if it's true, it's from him, it is also utopic and out of this world. We cannot be celebrating on each 12th of December people who died for this country to be where it is, and come back and use the instruments of government to write a response like the one written by Kiraithe. It is out of this world. Look at it this way, Ben. The greatest virtues that we have as a race is human dignity and personal liberty. They remain the center stage of human dignity. Anything that takes those things away is in itself should not be condoned. We should not be sitting here and discussing that somebody gave us loans. That's why they should come and just do things that run on the face of us, our existence of Kenyans. Look at it this way. Today, let's say it is akin to a bank giving you a loan to buy a car and giving you the driver to be driving the car. And when that one is not even enough, they tell you we can only transport food bought from the bank store in the same car.
Why does the government accept, to sign on such terms?
I think the problem is the African mentality that I am a weak person. It's not, the issue is not, it is the mentality in an African man that I cannot do this better than them. How do you go into loans, somebody gives you a loan and tells you the only food you can be cooking in your house is food manufactured by my uncle? How? You give me loans and let me be. The other thing is this: we should not allow Chinese to export to this country their issues with human rights. If they have no respect for human rights in China, that is well and good there. This is Kenya. We have a constitution and we have due regard to rule of law. We should be. And therefore, for us to sit here and discuss that there's a Chinese pruning flowers, they should have been taken back to their country when the report was made. Secondly, look at it this way. Why do we need a watchman who is Chinese? You need now to hire an interpreter to tell him open the gate. Are we a sick nation? We are not a failed state. Yes. Secondly, look at it this way. To borrow or to go for loans is not a bad thing. But to go for loans that affect the well-being of a country is a wrong thing. It is actually loaning the future of this country to the hands of neocolonialists. Right. We did not fight for independence to come and walk into the yoke of Chinese socialistic neocolonialism.
Yeah. Quick one,
yes,
Ben, that we need to realize concerning this project and why basic common sense does not apply in a lot of projects. Ben, it is impossible for you to steal and think at the same time. When you become a thief, it is obvious that your IQ will reduce. How does that work? One, you have to plan to steal. Two, you have to steal. And three, you've got to hide your tracks all the time. This is what happens. The problem we have is that the people who are supposed to be planning for this country are busy stealing. And that is why, as long as corruption exists, it is the reason why you'll find 5,000 Chinese coming into this country, because the person who was supposed to be watching the gate was busy receiving bribes from the Chinese. The truth of the matter is the Chinese people, the Chinese government is the only government which participates in African corruption wide-eyed. They do it from Namibia all the way to Senegal, where I have been, where they bribe officials to turn a blind eye to obvious discrimination, to obvious misuse of the rules of the land.
This must, on that point that Mark is raising, we have had so many examples. Even the Makueni Senate did say about that school that has been split in the middle and nothing has been done, but there are some bribes have allegedly exchanged hands. Why does the government allow this to happen?
Well, you know, the deputy president had an interview with a local newsroom a few days ago and indicated that Kenya's biggest challenge is not corruption. In his view, our biggest challenge is leaders who don't have a plan and who don't have a vision. And that is demonstrated on these SGR projects. Because when you look at the mathematics, it's all wrong. When you look at the net present value as an accountant, if you look at economics, even from an environmental perspective, it's all wrong. Kenya is known for its flora and fauna that gives us a lot of money. So how do you allow a project like this to take place without an environmental impact assessment? If they would have done a solid one, they would have known it was going to disrupt those academic institutions, that it was going to split a school into two. They would have known that if there was going to be rain, there were going to be floods in Cumberland. But because of what Mark Bichacha has indicated, and it's common ground all over the world, that the Chinese have got a very high appetite for corruption. They know how to play around with top public officials and give them a bit of resource. If we set up a commission of inquiry today, you may discover that out of the 400 billion that we'll be paying the Chinese, probably only 200 billion has gone to the projects. The other 200 billion has been shared among top government officials. And right now, when you start looking at the mathematics, even if you scored a very strong E, but you look at the mathematics, that the only revenue you're making in a year is 1 billion, but you are spending 2.4 billion. You don't need to have even a scientific calculator to establish that that's voodoo economics. Now the question is, why did the Jubilee administration accept for this project to go on with those negative returns? Mark Bichache says that at some stage you need to come up with public goods that may not need to be commercially viable. But they must make at least basic economic sense. Right. This one doesn't make sense.
So what's the way forward? Lucy, let me come to you before I come to Wanakili. Because a lot of money has been sunk into this project. And there are a lot of doomsday prophets saying how we are mortgaging our country. But we're heading there. So what is the solution from where you see?
Okay, I think the best way out now is for the government to sit down again and rethink or reface that issue. Because already you have started that project for SGR. To them, it was a nice idea. In fact, I cannot blame the government because it was a fitness idea. But now, since it has already happened, the best way out now is for the government to sit again and think on the way forward. One, as a country now where we are heading to, it's not good. But I think once the government has, as I said before, formed a committee of inquiry, then they can come up with a conclusion on how to tackle that issue. Yeah.
Ben, before Karori speaks, just allow me a second. Allow me a second. Most of the cargo from the port of Mombasa ends in Nairobi, 75%, and only 25% is for onward transmission to Uganda and Burundi and Rwanda.
So it can never make any economic sense.
No, but the tragedy is there's going to be a Kenyan delegation going to China to get another tranche so that we get the SGR all the way from Nairobi now to Malaba.
All right.
So you begin to ask yourself, what kind of economics are we practicing?
165 billion more.
Ben, you know, the thing is, it's very easy to actually make SGR viable. And you do not need a commission of inquiry. In fact, that money you're going to spend, send to me because I'll give you all the advice you need. The fact that we think of SGR only as bringing things into this country is wrong. What we need to do is expedite our manufacturing, expedite our processing, so that now we reverse that trend. Now we need to export more than we import. My friend, we live in a country where to get a needle, you have to import it from China. Are we insane? You know, the technology to make a needle, my grandfather knew we had ironsmiths in Africa. And for us not to even be able to do what our grandparents could do is a height of insanity. What Kenya needs to think about, if you're going to think about the SGR in a viable way, is number one, how is the farmer who has nyanyas and kitungus in the middle of Webuye, how are those nyanyas and kitungus going to get to Mombasa and across the country? That's how you make it viable.
Only, is there any way of making the SGR economically viable?
We go back to feasibility study. You cannot be taking the SGR, a huge project, to a place where it cannot open up economies. The only way to make sense of such a facilities or utilities like SGR, it must spur economies, either within or without. Without that, it might remain as a national monument which has no economic value. Take, for example, today, if SGR passes in a village, let's say in Matungu, where Mumia's sugar failed, what will it help them? They'll be seeing it as just a snake passing through. We need to attach economic value to its passing there so that we do not invest in projects where people have earmarked kickbacks and handouts instead of earmarking the economies that will be gained. Secondly, I think it has come to a point where we need to relook our national debt management policy, if we have one. Because as things go, we might be getting money, yes, but we are not getting the value for our money. The other day, as Kibaki was leaving, each Kenyan had a debt of 48,000. Now we are talking about 108 or 106,000 each Kenyan is owed. But are we seeing the value for that money? I think not yet. So we need to get there. Secondly, in terms of coming back to these Chinese, we cannot allow, and we ought not to allow, foreigners to come to this country to start selling in vibandas and to do all manner of things. What are we doing to our youth? Are we just making them to become the rally, to be the people who will be seen in the rallies? Because recently in the last election, I saw Chinese in our political rallies. So what else are we doing?
All right, let's leave it there. It's a discussion that is not going to end anytime soon. We are keeping an eye on that. Josiah Mlai says, Eric Barasa says Chinese, but at the same time, CFS, clearing and forwarding farms and truck transport are soon going to close down, rendering thousands jobless. There's one here from Edgar Wangula says, we are discussing about the Chinese and loans which are not even benefiting Kenyans. Instead, they're stealing even before they reach our banks. Our leaders have no plans. Kenya is dead. That is very glum looking there. Musa Nyandusi Omari on Twitter says, Chinese government is the only country in the world that is participating in development projects in Africa, having bribed state officers with total disrespect for human rights, debt burden, and entrenchment of neo-colonialism. Keep this conversation on going on Twitter. Our Twitter hashtag is KTN Sunday Edition. A very important discussion. Chinese controlling 66% of Kenya's bilateral debt, and this is set to continue growing. What is your take? Keep that conversation ongoing. Let's take a quick commercial break here on Sunday Edition. We are back shortly. When we come back, we'll be talking about county governors now demanding for immunity against or from prosecution. What is your take on that as well? Stay there.